Hey, well, welcome back to the TuckerAllen Live on Facebook as we bring it to you every Friday at 1 o'clock. Just going to spend 10 to 15 minutes talking about topics that interest you in the area of estate planning and wills and trusts. And I'm always joined by one of the TuckerAllen attorneys, and today's no different, in our Kansas City area office, Kevin Mason. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, Scott. Thank you so much for having me today.
Hey, thanks for joining. Today we want to talk about, actually in our last podcast and virtual town hall, we talked a lot about powers of attorney. We talked about POD, transfer on death, those types of things. And so today's no different. I want to remind everyone, obviously, you can check us out on TuckerAllen.com and our social media. You can go look for a lot of resources there. Items like today's topic, which is beneficiary designations. We want to do that. But more importantly today, for the short time that we have you, we'd love to hear from you. Submit your questions in the comment section. I'll be watching that as well. So you can go ahead and let us know what your questions are. We'll try to get answers for you. Otherwise, you can tune into our podcast that we do every week, as well as this Facebook Live on Friday. So Kevin, let's talk a little bit about beneficiary designations, because it's always really a hot topic. People always think it's a great substitute for a will and a trust, but maybe you can go through, and I'll just throw out some common designations. POD. What is POD?
Sure. So POD is payable on death, and what that is, it's generally used with some sort of bank account or an investment account maybe. And what that just means is that it's payable on death. Whenever the person who owns that account passes away, then you have a designation and you put someone in there, or it could be a charity sometimes if you would like to do that, and it pays the money that's in that account to them upon your death. One thing that people need to be aware of a little bit with those is that the joint ownership issue. So if you're married and you have a spouse and you have it POD, whoever the first spouse to pass away, then that second spouse who's still surviving, they will have, it just transfers directly to them. So the POD doesn't need to be used for spouse to spouse or for a joint ownership situation.
Before I get into the other item that you can utilize, can these be used? Are they to be used as a substitute for a will or a trust? Can they be used in conjunction with a will? And then we can talk a little bit about the trust later on. But
sure,
that's always the question: is can I do one or the other, or should I do both?
Sure. So my suggestion would be to do both. Absolutely. If you have a will, you definitely want to have, if you have a will, you can name everything in the will and say, I want my bank account to go to this person. I want my investment account to go to this person. And then you wouldn't have the need for the POD or the TOD if you did that. But what happens if you're only using the will and you don't have that POD, that payable on death, then all those accounts and everything that's in them does have to go through probate. So the POD allows that probate avoidance.
So you can use the payable on death, the POD, with bank accounts, right? Checking, savings, those type of investment accounts that have some sort of a cash or cash equivalent, or those types of setup?
Yes, absolutely. That's what they're for.
What about life insurance?
So life insurance would be another one that would be payable on death like that. And generally what you would want to do with a life insurance policy, if you have a spouse, the same as an investment account. So for an IRA or a Roth IRA, things like that, all of those you want those to be funneled to your spouse because your spouse does have some tax advantage. So you'd like them to be payable to that person upon your death.
So brings up TOD, transfer on death. Kind of what are the types of property that you would use a TOD for?
Sure. So a TOD, it gets used really interchangeably a lot with POD. Some places that have investment accounts, they will call it a TOD instead of a POD. But an easy way to think about it is that a TOD, the transfer on death, would be something that's more for personal property that you have a title for, such as a car or a boat or something like that.
So I know my wife was titling a new car this week, and they asked, do you want TOD? Do you want to put it in your trust? And so those are the things that everyone thinks about particularly. They may have a car now and it's not TOD. Can they change it and make it TOD?
Absolutely. It's a fairly easy process other than having to go to the DMV, which can be painful occasionally, but the process itself is very easy. So all that you have to do is you have to show up, you have to write down who that person, or again, some people would like to give it to a charity or something like that. And you just have to write that in there on the title, and then you take it to the DMV and you're good to go.
I wasn't really avoiding it, but I'm pretty good at procrastinating. I needed a trust. When I found TuckerAllen, all our questions were answered, all of our fears allayed.
You want your wishes in place, so there's no guessing, no stress on the children.
Basically, they talk about what you need, what's important to you. It was more conversational, really very simple.
So beneficiary deed, I've heard that. I know relatives, friends have said beneficiary deed. When would you use that and how does it work?
So beneficiary deed gets used with your home or some sort of other real property that you have. And what it does is you own the property still while you're alive, just like everything else here that we've talked about. But what it does is upon your death, it takes that deed and it transfers it over to that person that you're deeding it to with the beneficiary deed. So it creates the title. It doesn't take effect until you pass away, but whenever you pass away and there's proof of death, then what it does is it transfers that title of the real property to the person that you have named in your beneficiary deed.
So if there are multiple owners or people that own it, and when does that beneficiary take, let's say husband, wife, and they do a beneficiary deed to a child, when does that take place?
So it would not take place upon the death of the first spouse, because that property is going to be co-owned. So whenever the first spouse passes away, then the second spouse owns that property outright by themselves. I'm speaking in general terms, but generally that is the way that it would occur. And then what will happen is upon the death of the second spouse, then that's whenever that beneficiary deed is going to take effect.
Got it. So the last thing we think about is joint ownership. What is that and how does that work relative to whether it's property, bank accounts, anything that you have both names on?
Sure. So with joint ownership, it's going to be the first person to pass away. If it's, again, I just like using the husband and wife analogy, or, it's easy to visualize. So you have a husband and wife, husband passes away first, he and his wife co-own their bank account. Wife is now the sole owner of the bank account. So the joint ownership, it avoids probate as well. And what it does is it just gives everything to the owners that are still alive upon the death of one of the owners.
So what are the pros, the advantages of only or utilizing the POD, the TOD, the beneficiary deed, and the joint ownership? What are the advantages to that?
Sure. So the advantage is that whenever you're using that in conjunction with a will, it allows you to avoid a lot of probate within the will. So because wills have to be probated, they have to go through that system. But whenever you make things TOD, POD, or that beneficiary deed for your home, it allows you to skip the probate process for those assets.
I guess the probate being a negative, what other negatives would there be by using just this mechanism?
So some other negatives that there are to this would be, it's more of a blunt instrument. It's not refined. You can, depending upon the institution, they'll allow you to name multiple beneficiaries for that POD. So you could name your 3 children as the beneficiaries, but let's say two of your children are doctors and the other has devoted their life to working for a nonprofit, and there's a significant gap in wages between your children. What that POD won't allow you to do is kind of account for that. So the POD is just going to split it 3 ways and give it to your 3 children. Whereas some other devices, they're going to allow you to split it up and say, you know what, these 2 kids, they're doing pretty good. I'll give them a little bit of money, but I want to give most of the money to this child who has devoted their life to this nonprofit.
So you can't really make particular, as you're saying, specific provisions that you may in a will or a trust, as if say someone's got some medical needs, they may need more money, you want to give 70% to them. You can't do that on a simple POD, right?
No, you can't do that on a simple POD. And another thing that you can't really do on a POD as you can with a will or a trust is that if, like you're just saying, someone with medical issues, we don't want them to get kicked off of Medicaid, or they have a special needs situation, we don't want them to get kicked off of the government assistance they're on, and kind of the POD can't account for that because it's a, like I said, it's a more blunt instrument. It's just going to distribute those assets to you.
And I even foresee, as I'm thinking, we're talking about this, and obviously if you're watching, submit any questions you have in the comment section. We'll try to answer those for you. But I'm thinking, you know, a house, your mother dies and you have two siblings and it's TOD to both. One wants to keep the house, one wants to sell it. Now you're in an argument, right? Now it creates this whole problem that you've got to go to court anyway, probably to get something done, right?
Right. No, that's a common issue where things such as real property like that can be, it's that TOD and it gets to you and you say, I don't want this. I like the house I live in. I just want to sell it. I don't want to, or the family farm. I just want to sell the family farm. I don't have any interest in this. But then your sibling says, well, this has a lot of sentimental value to me, blah, 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 but they don't have the money to pay for your half of it. And then it just can create a lot of sticky situations that can be fairly easily avoided.
Yeah. You mentioned that. I remember there's a farm locally here down in St. Louis that drew a lot of attraction in Halloween for pumpkins, and the parents died and the siblings got in a huge argument about what to do with the property. And I got to believe it was something similar to this. One wanted to operate it, one wanted to sell it, and they had to shut down this very successful, very profitable business because they couldn't agree. And another one was a local attraction with a very, notable family that they also had divergent ideas on what to do with it. It just sounds very easy to do, a TOD, but then you just don't foresee all the issues, and that you probably, as you suggest, it's much better to probably combine it with a will and a trust to really be specific and maybe accommodate that. Now, hey, if there's just sell it and divide the money however you suggest, right? That's probably the best way to do it.
Right. On my end, an estate planning attorney, what I would say the best interest for most clients would be, let's create that revocable trust, because it is, whereas this TOD is a sledgehammer, the trust is a scalpel. So we can go in there and we can make it exactly the way that you want it to be. And it'll have all the provisions you want, everything in there. It'll say exactly, it will get your wishes done exactly as you would like. And although it is the cost up front it's not extravagant or anything like that, but it is more the TOD, and the POD is free. You just do it yourself. You write it in and it's over with. So there is a little bit of cost associated with that up front, but it saves a huge amount of headache and heartache on the back end.
I think of the TOD, and I've mentioned my grandmother. She's a great example of what not to do, and to take advantage of the services you all offer at TuckerAllen. She utilized TOD, and she had stocks. So she had 3 children. One got an Ameren UE preferred stock. One got, I can't remember, call it Macy's. Another one got something else. Well, the preferred stock was very, very valuable, and she didn't anticipate the fluctuation in its valuation. Thankfully, the 3 siblings got along, and they decided to pool it and divide it equally. But that's a great example of how at TOD, you're not thinking, and maybe you're not monitoring the value, and your intentions are excellent, and you want to divide it equally, and that just failed miserably. And thankfully they got along, and they were able to agree on how it should be distributed equally. But isn't that just a perfect example of how bad a TOD can go?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It is. It's much more difficult to create that equitable distribution among your beneficiaries with just TOD and POD, whereas a will or a trust, you can do it very, very easily.
Yeah, I mean, they're not bad things to utilize, right? I mean, you should consider utilizing, but only when consulting with someone like you or one of the other TuckerAllen attorneys, or someone who practices exclusively in estate planning, right?
Absolutely. We utilize TODs and PODs all the time because we want you to be able to, while you're living, we want your assets to be in your control, or like the car or anything else. So we will make those, they're yours right now, but then later, after you pass away, then they TOD into the trust and they get to avoid probate, and we have that scalpel instrument instead of the sledgehammer.
Right. So as we wrap up our segment on TuckerAllen Live on Fridays, kind of what's the takeaway for everyone watching right now?
My takeaway from this would be that you want to utilize this instrument, but you also want to use it in conjunction with a trust or a will. So they're great instruments, PODs, TODs. They're very useful. We need to utilize them, but they're best used in conjunction with a will and a trust.
Yeah. Good stuff, Kevin. Thanks again for joining us from TuckerAllen. You can check them out at TuckerAllen.com. You can schedule a consult if you have questions and you just want to get answers. They can do that. You can do that online. You don't even have to pick up the phone. You can go into their website, TuckerAllen.com, click schedule an appointment. You can get more information about the cost of their services. It's nothing hidden. It's just sitting right out there on the website, what the fees are to prepare some of the most common things like wills and trusts and those things. So thanks, Kevin, for joining today on TuckerAllen Live on Facebook.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Continue to check us out every week on Fridays. Check out our podcast that will also bring you more information in greater detail, and virtual town halls. We'll do those as well. Check us out at TuckerAllen.com. Until next Friday, have a great weekend.